Hi, and welcome to Chapter 8. In Chapter 8, we're going to start working with arrays. This chapter is going to extend into Chapter 9 as well. Arrays are a great way of storing data that is related to itself in a linked list. Let's get started. The first thing to do with an array is to understand what it is. An array is simply a named list of data items in Java that all have the same data type. Some languages allow you to have multiple data types, but in Java, they all have to have the same data type. So we refer to each item in that list as an element, the element of the list. Arrays are always zero-based. They start from the number 0 or the index 0, and we move our way on. So position 0, position 1, position 2. They actually refer to contiguous memory locations, which means that when you store them in your computer's memory, they all store together in a list, and then we can count them based on what data type they are as to how much space they are using. So it's a really easy way to say, I want the 5th item in a list. We use arrays for this. When we declare a new array, we declare it with a set of square brackets after the data type. So if I wanted an array of doubles, I would say double bracket bracket, open and close brackets. I would say integer, open and close brackets, and then give it the variable name. The variable name, sales figures, ID numbers, that's what you're going to reference each of the individual elements or the array as a whole, depending on how you're using it. Generally, when we refer to arrays, we put them in a plural variable because they're referencing more than one item. So you would often put it as a list of numbers or employees with an S. And sometimes people don't do the S, they just add the final word of list. Sales list, employee list, table, so on and so forth. You're going to find your own way of doing arrays just like every other piece of coding, and that's going to be how you like to declare arrays. But remember, try to be consistent with whichever convention you end up using. When we want to reference an individual item in an array, we refer to that as the subscript or the index of that item. In Java, what we do is we reference that index inside of the square brackets. So we declare our array name, ID numbers, and then open and close brackets with square brackets and then the index number on the inside. By the way, that index number can be a variable. So it can be an I for an iterator, or it can be a num or some sort of variable name, as well as just an individual actual number. So remember, those numbers obviously would always be integers if you were going to use them. But in this situation, you can always use a variable. And we're going to show you a couple of different ways to do that in our code. In this project from page 374, 373, we are going to be demoing how to use an array. So I've created my demo array class file and I've added my main. We're going to go ahead and declare a brand new array that's going to hold 4 salaries for our employees. So I'm going to make a double array. So double being the type and open and close brackets saying that it's an array. And I'm going to call it salaries. So this is going to be my variable name, salary, so I can reference it. And I'm going to set it equal to a new double array. And I'm going to declare it as being the size of 4. So when we declare our array, you go ahead and put in how large you want it to be inside of the brackets in your new declaration. Same way we would make a new string, same way we would make new employee or student, new double array. In this case, it's going to have 4 values. I'm going to now assign values to each of those 4 positions. So remember, we're 0-based. So we're going to do salaries bracket 0. So we're going to start with our 0 position. And I'm going to set that equal to 12.25. I'm going to do the same thing for the other 3 salaries. I'm going to set them equal to 13.55 and then make sure you spell correctly. We're going to set that equal to 14.25, and finally we're going to set our 3 position equal to 16.85. So in this case, we have declared our 4 values inside of our array. So our array now has some values. I can go and print each salary individually. So I can say print And we'll go ahead and give it a little header. Oops. And then I can do salaries 0, salaries 1, 2, and 3. And what this will do is obviously print out my different salaries. So here we have our salaries and the different numbers for them. Sometimes you get a little off with your subscripts, and it's important for you to recognize that you're zero-based. So if I were to add a fourth one here, either printing it out or accessing it up here, I would get an error. And I should get an index out of bounds error. So array index out of bounds, because index 4 doesn't exist, because the length of the array is 4, which means it only goes up to 1 past that. It would give me the same error if I put that error up at the top of printing it out up there. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an explanation of how to use your array. Couple of things to remember when you're initializing your array, when you're setting up your array for the first time. The default initialization of an array can be null. Null means there's no memory addressed, there's nothing actually attached to it at this point. So you could say an int array, int, open close brackets, some numbers, semicolon, and be done. Or you could say it's equal to null. However, more efficiently, if you know it, you can initialize it with a count. So initialize it as a new integer array that has a size of 10. How many numbers are you planning on putting in there? We can do that. We can say new int 10, and it will declare a memory location that will store 10 numbers. If we were using an integer, so numbers, the default is 0. So it would create 10 zeros in your array position in the memory. If you are using a character, singular character has to be primitive type. In this case, a primitive type default. The character would be null. So there would be no value in there. There would be no memory location. It would just be a space. And then Booleans are defaulted to false. That all being said, you can put objects or reference types in an array as well. But if they are primitive types, these are the default values that you would be using. Another way of initializing your array, rather than just saying a new integer that has 10 spaces, is to actually populate the entire array at the beginning. If this is an array that you understand, say the months of the year or the days of the week, you could go ahead and use curly braces and declare all of the values that are in there, initialize them to initial values when you declare it. So I can say integer, open and close bracket, multiples of 10, and I could put in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, something like that, and put them inside curly braces separated by commas. This will declare a new integer array with these values already there. If you know what the values are in there, it's more efficient to do it that way. If you don't, if you need the user to tell you, then obviously that's not going to be an option. A second thing that we could do with this array is declare it as a new value with the values in a constructor, which is kind of convenient. So instead of just saying new double up here with these salaries, I can go ahead and declare it all at one time. So I'm actually going to copy and paste. Now, instead of saying new double here, I can just declare it as a new array by using curly braces and putting in the numbers that I want. So 12.25, comma, 13.55, 14.25, and 16.85. Because we have declared it as a double array to begin with, it knows that the data type is a double, which is fine, and it will know that it is 4 long because we entered in 4 values. So I can do the same print here, and I should get my same salaries. So we can reference the individual values in an array by simply referencing their subscript. Score array 0, score array 1, score array 2. Sure, you can do that. And you can do mathematical operations on them, plus equals increase, and increase them all by 3. Give everyone a little extra score. We can do that, but it's so much better to use loops. Loops are designed for this. Loops are perfect for this because you only have to write the change one time and just loop through the array. So if you had 50 entries, you're not going to want to write score array bracket 48, score array bracket 49, so on and so forth. So you want to have your loop to be able to walk through your array. If your constraint is a Boolean condition, you can keep that less than or equal to or less than the length of your array. Remember, arrays are 0 based. So if we have a size 10 array, we have indexes 0 through 9. We do not have a 10th position. That would be an 11th index, and we can't go that far. So remember, it's always -1. So you can do your conditional as less than the length of your array. And length is a method that exists on, it's actually a property that exists on your array object. You don't need open and close parentheses for your length object or for your length piece of information. When you do your loop, if you can avoid hard coding and put in the length, then you know if you increase the size of your array later, it'll automatically still work because we always reference the length of the array. If we hard coded in there 5 and then we changed our array to be 10, we'd have to go find all the places we wrote 5, which is hard to do. We really don't like to hard code. So any position where you can have a final variable that is your count, or you can have the length of your array, we like those a lot better than hard coding in any numbers. Remember, string length is a method. It uses open and close parentheses. My array length is a field or a property, and it doesn't need the parentheses. It's just like referencing a object's data field directly. So you can just do array.length, and it's just there. You don't have to use the open and close parentheses. That's kind of one of those things that people sometimes get stuck on. They did length for string, and they understood it was open and close parenthesis. Then they do length on array, and it doesn't work the same way. So try to think of them that way, that length with an array, when you create an array, the length is going to be a field or a property as opposed to a method. It does not need open and close parentheses. In Java, we actually give you this really cool enhanced for loop. We like this for loop because it allows us to be able to do for each value that exists in your array easily, nice and easily, because you don't have to write an entire for loop. You simply can say for variable type, variable, colon, array, and it knows that you want to walk through the whole array and get all the values out. The value is actually the value itself. It is not the index of the value. So as long as you can remember that it's the individual element, that is sometimes an easier way to do it. Some people call this a for each loop, but don't forget that the syntax in Java is just a for. Sometimes you don't need the whole array. So if you set the array to a size 10 and only use 5, so it's important, if your situation is like that, that rather than using your length, you would use your count. So you would count as you're adding items to the array. Sometimes people will create an array that is 20 and only use up 4 or 5 spaces and then try to do an average. Remember, the default values are going to be zeros or nulls. So trying to do an average where 16 of the 20 are 0 is going to throw off your numbers. So be aware, when you only use part of your array, you need to keep a count of how much of your array you've filled. At this point, we're going to go look at some code to be able to see the average of quizzes. This is a really good one to start visualizing how the items get put into the array, how they get stored there, and how you can pull them back out. On page 380, we introduce a file called average of quizzes. And I think this is a really good example of how you can use arrays to store information. So we are going to make our average of quizzes. Inside of our average of quizzes, we're going to declare a couple of variables, and we're going to allow the user to enter new quiz scores until they're done. They may enter 0 quizzes, they may enter 1 quiz, they may enter 10 quizzes, or anything in the middle. So we don't have a maximum amount of quizzes. Oh, actually we do. We set ourselves a maximum. They can go up to 10. So anything between 0 and 10 should be able to be handled. So let's go ahead and declare our variables to start with. we're going to do our int array to hold our quizzes, and we're purposely making that a size of 10. So we can do a new int array with a size of 10. That's why we're maxing it out, because we have a maximum amount. And then we have a couple of int variables. Again, we like to store things in a variable at the top so that we know how we can change those. If I wanted to change the size of my array later and make it into 20, I can change the max to 20, and then I don't have to change any code further down. Let's go ahead and use our input to get some information from our user. And let's ask the user for the first quiz score or quit. So we're going to do our sysout, and we're going to say enter quiz score, or in this case, we're going to put our sentinel quit to quit, and then give ourselves a little bit of space so the user knows where to print. Okay, let's set our score equal to our input at this point, because, and we're going to assume it's the next int for our input. Okay, we got our first score. Now we need to loop. We need to store our score where it belongs, and we need to loop and ask them again if we want to do another one or if we're at our max. So when we do our loop, we're going to use a while loop, and we're going to say as long as your score is not equal to your quit sentinel. So if our score was 999 to quit, we would have quitted right away. So we wouldn't even bother going into the while loop because we set that equal to score. Now we're going to go ahead and assign the first position of our scores array equal to the score that we just got in. So we have our scores array. The index that we're going to use is going to be our count, and we're going to increment our count as we go along so that this will be 0 right now as we set it when we declared it, but it'll be 1 when we increment it. So the array at position 0, we're going to set equal to score. Then we're going to increment our total and increment our count. So total plus equal. In this case, you could choose to put in your score directly, like this, or you could choose to use the array value that you're using, that you just assigned. They're both the same thing. We just set them equal to each other. So this is just a personal preference on which direction you want to go with that. And then we're going to increment our count. So our count is now 1. We've incremented it. Our total is whatever the total score is because we need to find an average. So we need the total. And we know how many we have. Okay. Now we need to start worrying about the situation where we have put in enough scores. So if our count is equal to our max. So we just incremented our count. If we just got it up to 10, we have to stop because our array is done. So we're just going to set our score equal to our quit. What will happen now is when it goes back to the while loop, it will fall out because our score is no longer a quit. Otherwise, so we're not at max, we're anything other than max. Then we're going to re-ask the user to enter another quiz score and store that. So I'm actually going to copy these from up here. And I'm going to just add the word next so that they know that we're getting the next one, or the quit variable to quit, storing that in the score. Okay, this is all we need for our while loop. So our score right now is either quit or our next integer from our user. When it comes up here, if the user entered 999 after putting in like 5 scores, that's fine. We'll go ahead and break out. Otherwise, we will keep asking and keep storing those values. Okay. At this point, we can go ahead and print out some information. So I'm going to go ahead and close my scanner to make sure that that gets closed. And let's start printing. Print information. Okay, first thing we want to print is each of the different scores. So we are going to say with a backslash or with a new line just to be able to make it clean. N. The scores entered were, so that we can let the user know what they were. Now we're going to use a really quick for loop to just loop through our array, which is the point of having these all in an array. You can use your one line for loop to be able to do this. So we're going to do 4. We're going to do an int x equals 0 because we're just going to use that for an iterator. As long as x is less than count, which it should do as long as we know how many counted we have. And we're going to increment x plus plus. One line down, all we're doing, sys out, and we can do our scores, x, and then a space. So the scores are going to be lined up one score after another with spaces in between them. We don't need the curly braces because it was just one line for our for loop. Just make sure that you tab back to get out of your for loop to get back into the main line. Here we're going to go ahead and do our if our count is not equal to 0. We have to throw this in because if our count is equal to 0, then when we try to calculate the average, we'll divide by 0 and the world will end. So if our count is not equal to 0, then you can print the average is, and we can go ahead and calculate here in line. If you wanted to make a variable, that would be fine, but I don't mind using an inline mathematical operation here, where we're going to do total times 1.0. The reason we're doing total times 1.0 is to turn it into a float so that, or a double, so that we can get a decimal here. And we're going to divide that by the count. Now, if you wanted to verify or just encourage that the total times 1.0 was going on the top, you could always put in some extra parentheses here. So divide by the count and semicolon. That's how we're going to print. If count is equal to 0, then I can just print no scores were entered. Okay. Remember, one line if statements, one line for statements don't need to have curly braces. You can choose to put them in if you'd like. I sometimes do, I sometimes don't. It really depends on how I feel about the code at the time. So this is our basic method to be able to ask the user for a quiz score multiple times until they get to the end. Let's go ahead and run it and see how it goes. Always good to run your code. Enter quiz score or 999 to quit. Well, let's start with 99. Apparently I put in 2 nines. So we're going to start with 99, which is silly because the quiz score obviously could be 99. And good. The scores entered were, but no scores were entered. So there were no scores. Let's go ahead and change that 999 to 1 more so that you can actually get a 999 on your quiz. Okay, let's try it one more time. And let's start entering some scores. So we got a 75. Do we have another score? Let's do an 89. Let's do a 99, and let's do a 64. And I think we're done. We only had 4 scores. We're going to go ahead and enter 999 to quit. And it will tell you the scores that were entered were 75, 89, 99, and 64. And your average was 81.75. Now, let's check the third case where we get up to 10 scores. Always good to check every possible case, which is why formatting all of this or lining it out with a piece of paper and some flow charts really helps. So let's enter a couple scores. 85, 98, we'll give ourselves 100, 58, ooh, didn't do well on that score, 89, 88, 67. It stopped me. You see I entered in 10 scores and it stopped. So we still said these are the scores that were entered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and my average score was an 82. Make sure you always check every one of your cases. So if we look back at our code real quick, things we need to check. Get to the point that the count is max. Make sure you also check that it doesn't. Make sure that you break out of your while loop by using the code correctly. If you had the scores wrong or something like that, that wouldn't work right. Make sure that you run this if statement where the count is not equal to 0. Make sure you run this if statement where the count is equal to 0. So don't forget, I told you, you can store objects or class types in your array as well as primitive types. They don't have to all be primitive types. You can put in objects. We can put in strings. We can also put in things like employees or students or other types of objects that we've come up with. You can use that enhanced loop if you want to, and that kind of is nice. Just remember, when you want to declare something, instead of doing individual items, you could use an array to store those. When we did our constructor, you can use a loop to store things as new values. So in the example kind of here on the page, instead of saying that we have 7 different employee types, we have a new array that stores 7 employees. Cool. For each employee, we can enter in the new employee number with their starting salary and how much, what their job description is, so on and so forth. We can use that information. When we print out, we can use that employee display method or something like that to print out nicely by just doing a quick for loop. You're going to find when you have lots of data, using a for loop is a much easier way to print out or get your information from your array than having multiple values that you have to type in all that code. On page number 386, we introduce the bowling team project. And the bowling team is going to go ahead and allow you to store strings in your array. Now, we've been doing numbers prior to this, so being able to do strings is important. We do want to create a bowling team class. So this is going to be the information for a class. So instead of just storing just a basic string, we're going to actually be using that inside of our class variable. So we are going to have our class for each team, and then who are the members in the team. You can have 4 people on the team. So class members, private string team name, because they get to have a name, and private string array members. And that's going to be equal to a new string array with 4 possible positions. So this is our class that we're going to be working with. Remember, when we think about a class, cookie cutter, the idea that it's each class that we instantiate will have its team name and then the members that are in it. So we're going to do some setters and some getters. So our public void set team name. And we're going to set our team name. Let's do it this. Dot team name equal team. And we're going to do a getter. Public string get team name. Okay. Let's do the same for our members. So with our members, we are going to set the member and have it give me in the setter which position is this person. So I'm going to say public void set member, and it's going to take both an int number and a string name because I need to know what position to put it in. And I'm going to go ahead and assign members bracket number, because that's the index that we're going to be putting this person in, is equal to name. At the same time, I'm going to use my getter, public string get team get member. And in this case, I am passing in a variable. I'm going to ask it what the number is because I need to know which member you want. So do you want the 0 member, the first member, the second member, or the third member? And I'm going to return members number. So I'm going to return the string that is stored inside of that position. Okay, let's go ahead and make our demo file. Bowling team demo.java. Sorry. String args. Okay. Inside of our bowling team demo, we are going to create a new team and allow the user to enter some information in. So I'm not going to manually type all this. I'm going to let the user enter what's the name of the team and who are the members. And then I'm going to be able to print out the information that's related to that. So I'm going to need a couple of variables. I'm going to have a string for the team name. I'm going to have a bowling team, which we are going to make a new bowling team because we need that object. And then we're going to have a couple of just helper function or methods or variables. We're going to have an int x that we're going to be using. We're going to have a final that is going to tell us how many team members I can have. And set that equal to 4. It's a constant, so it's not going to change, at least for right now. If we needed to change the code later, that would be fine. But for right now, we're going to set that. And we're obviously going to need a scanner. Okay. Now we need to get the information from the user. So the first thing we're going to get is, what is the name of the team? So, and in this case, we're actually going to just do a regular print so that it doesn't do that new line. And then we're going to set our name equal to whatever the user puts in. Next slide. Okay, we can now set our bowling team name. So team set name equal to name. Now we need to start getting our members. So we've assigned the name, we need to assign our members. So for x equals 0. By the way, if I didn't want to declare my x on line 8, I could always say int x at this point. X is less than, whoops, x is less than our number of team members, because it has to be less than 4. And we're going to x plus plus. All right, inside of our for loop, we need to get out what is the team member's name. Enter team member's name. And then we're going to get that in. Name is now equal to input next line. Yes, we are using the same variable that we did for the bowling team name because we've now assigned it, so we can use that variable again. And then we are going to set the team set member at position X, and we're going to give it the name. Because position X is 0, that will work just fine. So this is our for loop to get all of our team member information. Finally, we want to display the details of our team members. So I can do a sysout, and I can say, oops, members of team, and I can go get, what is the name of the team? Well, it's going to be team.getName. Then we need to print out each of the members. Okay, we're going to do another loop. For x equals 0, x is less than num team members. X plus plus. And underneath here, we are going to do our sysout. And we are going to print the team member and then a space. So team get member. Remember, we need to give it an integer. What integer are we going to give it? X. Because that's which number we want to reference. And then we'll put in a space so that we can have the names lined up. And we can print a new line at the end just to add a new line so that it spaces it out. Okay. Don't forget to close your scanner. And let's run it and see what happens. All right, it's going to say enter the team name. We're going to say Voyagers. And we're going to say John, Mary, Joe, and Sandy. And as you can see, it printed out members of the team Voyagers, John, Mary, Joe, Sandy. Each of these loops, you should start really getting comfortable with loops at this point where you can do that. The rest of this demo goes in and allows you to add more bowling teams adding 4 bowling teams so that we could have 4 teams to play against, and so on and so forth. I think you can understand how that's done by just modifying things around to make sure that you reference which team, and essentially you're putting most of the stuff that we put inside of another loop to be able to loop for 4 teams, create a new bowling team, find out what the team name is, and then find out what the team numbers are. One of the methods that we use with arrays is being able to use parallel arrays. The situation of a parallel array can be that there are 2 arrays that are next to each other and they both reference the same index at the same time. So if I had the values and the prices, each value would correspond to the same position for its price. Being able to use that is going to be an easy way to store multiple information without having to store it in an object. You can always create an object that stores the values and use that as well. Another thing we like to do is to search through our arrays, look through them to look for a value. In this case, we're looking for a specific item ordered and see if it exists in the list. We're going to look at this code in a second and be able to walk through it and see if we can understand it. You're going to need to understand how to search for your arrays for your homework, by the way. So the code searches, be able to keep track of what is the item that's ordered, did you find one, and make sure we go through the entire array to look for it. The example on 393 for parallel arrays really, I think, helps you to understand how those parallel arrays work. So we are going to come in here and do our find price.java file. In here, we're going to go ahead and make our main function. And we're going to have our couple of variables. So in this situation, we are going to have an array of integers for the product number and an array of prices for the price for that product. And they're going to be parallel arrays, which means the numbers are going to line up. So the 0 index in one array is going to reference the 0 index in the second array. So let's go ahead and declare our variables. Okay, so what we've done is we've created our 2 parallel arrays, valid values and prices. We have a couple of helper variables that we're going to be using, our string item, our item ordered, and our item price. And then we have a Boolean that is it a valid item that we're going to be able to using to find out whether or not the item is valid so that we can add it. Okay, at this point, we're going to go ahead and use our J option pane to go ahead and use an input dialog to ask the user, what item number do you want? So we are going to do a string item, and we're going to set that equal to, this is just a way of getting around having to use the scanner. This way we can use the swing and get you comfortable with that as well. J option pane dot show input dialog. And for a message, you're going to say, enter the item number you want to order. And we will assign that to string item. Then we are going to figure out, or we're going to get the item ordered as an integer. Item ordered equals, and we're going to use that integer dot parse int for our string item. So we're going to parse our string that came in, make sure we can figure out what the item ordered is. Once we have the item ordered, we're going to go see if we can find that item in our valid values. So for int x equals, I'm going to put int I. I tend to use I rather than x. I is less than number of items. I plus plus. And inside here, I'm going to say if the item ordered, that integer that we came up with, is equal to valid values at position I. So we're going to start with 0, the 0th item, and move our way through the array until we can find that value. So if you entered 108 as your item number, goes to 101. Nope, that's not it. 108. Oh, yes, that is it. So if it is the valid value. Now I know that it is a valid item. And I know that the item price is the value that exists at the same index in the prices array. So because we had our index number I that we're referencing, I know I can reference the same position in my parallel array. Otherwise, I'm just going to let the loop fall. So if it's not the right one, so if I did put in 108, the first time you come through, it's 101, it doesn't match, it just goes around and counts to the next one, and it walks through the entire array. You could choose to break out at this point, adding in a break at this point to break out of your loop, but it's not necessary. It will fall through and it'll be fine. Now that we're down to the bottom, print results, I can say if is valid item, because if that Boolean came back true, then I can print out, oh, we're doing a J-option pane, sorry. I can show message dialog and say the price of the item ordered is, put in my $sign, have it on this side so that it'll just line up nicely, the item price. So that's in the situation where we found it, where we found the item that you wanted. Otherwise, J-option pane, show message let's show message dialog. Otherwise, you entered an item number that doesn't exist. So, sorry, invalid item number, item entered. Okay. So, we have printing out. This is not in a loop, so it's not going to ask you multiple times. It's just going to check it the first time. If you wanted to put it in a loop, that would be great. In this case, I can keep this down a little bit so we can see all of our code. And we'll go ahead and run. When we get our little input box here, even with my spelling error, enter the number you want. So we want to check a couple of things. We want to check the first one. So we're going to check 101. And it's going to say the price of the item is 29 cents, which is good. Let's go ahead and fix my spelling error because that's going to irritate me. Let's go ahead and run it again. And let's pick a number like 304 to make sure we can get those values. And the price for 304, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's the sixth one over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, should be $3.19. And I think that's what we got. There we go, $3.19. Now we want to check something that doesn't work. So we're going to try one more time, and we're going to pick a number that is not in our list. Make sure you always check all of your if statements. Make sure you get one. So we're going to do 500 because there is no 500. And it should say, sorry, invalid item entered. You've actually been passing arrays to methods since the first line, because we've been using a string array of args in every main class or every main method we've used. Those were always string arrays. Now you can recognize what the open and close brackets were for. So your string arrays are what we've always been passing to main. We haven't been writing the code to use them yet, but you can always pass an array in as parameters. You can also return an array from a method. Both of these are really, really useful when you want to manipulate arrays, go through an array, check an array, print out everything in an array. You can make a method that says, give me the array and I'll print everything in it. So being able to pass arrays in and receive arrays back is really, really useful. Just like any other object, you can pass them as a parameter, you can receive them back as a return value. So this is an introduction to arrays. Chapter 9 will continue with arrays with some more concepts, but a couple of things to remember. Arrays are always zero-based. They start at 0. They never start at 1, which means the highest index you can ever get to is 1 minus the length, 1 less than the length. So try to keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about arrays. You always put a semicolon at the end of an array initialization, even if you are using those curly braces. Normally we don't put semicolons after curly braces, but in this situation we do, because the curly braces are containing the array and therefore they're necessary. The array length is a field, not a method, so you don't have to use parentheses for length. An array of characters is not technically a string. Some people will refer to an array of characters as a string, or a string is an array of characters. A string is a list of characters, but a string in Java is a specific type of object. It has methods associated with it, it is a class name, and it has things that are associated. There is an array of characters stored inside of a string somewhere, but it is not directly an array of characters. You can make an array of characters, but that's not going to instantly be a string. Those are two completely different things. And remember, the array name, the variable name, it refers to a reference to a memory location. So you cannot use that equal the same way you can't use it with a string or with any other object type. So array names, you can't do the equal to reference. You're going to have to check to see if the two arrays are equal manually. Hopefully this gave you a good start into arrays. Again, next chapter, we're going to come back with chapter 9 and continue with arrays to learn a little bit more about how to use them and what to do. Have a great week.